I love this story. It's a tech legend that actually turns out to be true in the very literal way. So in 1947, operators working on the Harvard Mark II, it was a very early electromechanical computer built with thousands of these little relay switches. They tracked down a malfunction and found that the culprit was a real moth trapped inside the machine's relay contacts. The Mark II was the kind of machine where the hardware was very physical. Instead of silicone chips like we're used to today, it relied on electromagnetic relays. There were these little switching mechanisms that click open and closed to represent logic and numbers. Now, because those relays have moving parts and electrical contact points, anything that blocks a contact, wedges into a gap, or interrupts current can cause the machine to behave incorrectly. And in this case, a moth stuck between relay contacts isn't just gross, it actually functionally was the same as jamming the switch in the wrong position. On September 9th, 1947, after the moth was found and removed, the team did something that turned an ordinary maintenance moment into tech history. They actually took that moth and taped it into the Mark II logbook and wrote the now famous line, "First actual case of bug being found." So the logbook page with the moth still attached is actually preserved to this day in the Smithsonian National Museum of American History, which is a big reason why the story is so well documented. That one sentence is also why the story gets so misquoted and oversimplified. People often say the first computer bug was a moth, and that's basically accurate as a really fun headline, but the wording in the log matters. It says the first actual case, which is kind of a wink to the fact that engineers already used the word bug to mean a problem. This was just the first time that someone could actually point to a literal bug and say, yep, that's the bug right there. So where did the term bug come from? Now, if it wasn't invented on that day, the word bug is slang for a defect or flaw in a system, and it's actually older than computers. It shows up in engineering culture back to 1800, and it was used broadly to mean something that's annoying, hidden problems that you discover when something just isn't working the way that you expected. Thomas Edison is often linked to popular early uses of the word bug in this sense, and the idea is well established. Bug was already engineering jargon long before software and computers even existed. This is why the moth story is best understood as a perfect collision of language and reality. By the 1940s, bug already meant a defect, so when a computer malfunction turned out to be caused by an insect, the joke basically wrote itself right there, right? So they also documented it in a way that was both practical, keeping a record of what happened, and a little bit of playfulness because it's really funny to see that the bug was so literal in this sense. Now, if you do look this up, you'll see the name Grace Hopper a lot. The name does come up for good reason, but there's a common misunderstanding that people don't realize that she wasn't actually there. So the story is widely associated with Grace Hopper because she really shared that story a lot in public talks, but she actually wasn't there when the incident took place. But she was kind of one of the main reasons that this story became so widely known because she was actually out there talking about this story, telling people what happened. So there's another detail that helps people appreciate this moment, and that's because early computers were often operated and maintained in a way that feels closer to industrial equipment rather than modern electronics. Now, when something went wrong, they didn't just reboot and check for error messages like we do today. They actually had to hunt through the physical systems, wiring, relays, panels, and logs. And in that environment, the idea of debugging wasn't really a metaphor. You actually could, in some cases, find actual bugs and then take them out, which would mean debugging your program or your software, your hardware, whatever you're working on, right? A really good takeaway here is that the Harvard Mark II Moth is one of the earliest and most famous examples of a computer bug being a literal bug, and we can actually point to a date, log entry, and the preserved artifact that's in a museum that the word bug for a technical defect wasn't invented by that moth, but it had already been used for decades in engineering. Then once this happens, it basically locks that into our culture as bug being the term for when something goes wrong with your computer. This is a really good example of how something can just get cemented in culture. So the fact that they were already using the term bug to describe a problem with a computer when they actually found a bug in a computer that was causing the problem, that basically cemented it as part of our culture and language that we will use now to describe a problem when we're having an issue with our computer. We found a bug. So I do want to talk a little bit about the Harvard Mark II. It was also known as the Aiken Relay Calculator. It was an early electromechanical computer built at Harvard University under the direction of Howard Aiken. It was actually funded by the U.S. Navy. It was completed in 1947 as a follow on the Harvard Mark I, and the Mark II represented that in-between era of computing where machines were automated and programmable, but they still relied heavily on physical switching hardware rather than fully electric circuitry. The Mark II was really big. It weighed about 25 tons and occupied more than 4,000 square feet of floor space. That's larger than most average homes here in the United States. Now, in terms of operation, the Mark II was not a stored program computer like we're used to now. It did not keep any of its programmed memory the way that these computers do now. Instead, it executed instructions sequentially from external input, so you still had to do a lot of work with these computers to get them to help you. But its relay technology made it significantly faster than the Mark I, with commonly cited timing figures around 0.125 seconds for addition and 0.75 seconds for multiplication. And again, the Navy did fund this project, and they really wanted the Mark II to help with major computation needs, such as ballistics-related calculations. So after it was debugged at Harvard, it was then delivered to the Naval Proving Ground in Dahlgren, Virginia, back in March of 1948, and then they started using it later that year. Of course, history will remember the Mark II not only because of the infamous bug and debugging incident, but also because it shows a big contrast between what computers used to look like and what they look like today. Now, the only problem you have is how do you bring this useless knowledge up in a casual conversation?